Wonderful. Thank you, everyone, for joining us for this latest episode of our Chart Your Path podcast series. This one is specifically a masterclass, and we're focusing today on the topic of how to share the load as a finance trustee and looking at really practical advice and tips on whether you're looking for a role or you're in a volunteering role as a treasurer or a trustee, finance trustee. How to make sure that that role feels sustainable, enjoyable, so you can continue contributing and making a huge impact on the charity or the school that you're volunteering with. So I'm really pleased to say, as part of the masterclass side of this, we have a guest with us today, Laura Walker, who I'll be talking to in a moment. And Laura has one of the best LinkedIn sort of bio descriptors that I have ever seen. I want to make sure I do it justice, so I will be looking across to my side. So founder, jobshare evangelist, we'll come back to that. Trustee treasurer, obviously we'll be talking about that. Leadership development coach, inclusive feminist, and proud parent. I thought that was brilliant. I think it feels like it covers all sort of dimensions of your life, which I love, Laura. So we will talk a bit more about that in a moment. And just in terms of what we'll cover over the next roughly 30 minutes, I'm just going to give a quick reminder and intro to Charter Path, just for those who are new to us. Then we've got a chance for a fireside chat with Laura. Then as sort of final reflections, a few final tips and tricks to suggest. And then we'll open up to any Q&A. I had a couple of questions pre-submitted as well for that. So just a quick reminder of Charter Path. So, I mean, I think back to we started Charter Path in 2020, and context there was, the huge financial challenges we were seeing, Alice and I, my co-founder, we were seeing for the charities and schools that we volunteered with, primarily as a consequence of the pandemic. And if you now fast forward to 2024, those immense challenges have only grown with the cost of living crisis, and it's impacting all aspects of how charities can operate and fund themselves. So whether that's impacting their income, where we're seeing a £10 billion shortfall in the funding that charities have seen compared to previous years, primarily driven by reduced donations as consumers understandably unable to maybe make charitable donations. But at the same time, demand on charities has risen. So 75% of charities have seen an increase in demand, obviously driving increases in their underlying costs alongside inflation. So financially a real challenge. If you then look to historically, charities and non-profits have really relied on volunteers as sort of the backbone of how they can operate and succeed. And unfortunately, again, if you rewind 10 years ago, over 25% of UK adults volunteered on a regular basis, and now that has dropped by over 40%, and we're down to now 16% of UK adults volunteering regularly. Within that specifically, we're also seeing real challenges around the diversity of the individuals who are volunteering. So primarily, we're seeing charity boards no longer representing the individuals or the end users that those charities are looking to support. So a real shortage of younger volunteers, a real shortage of diversity amongst volunteers. But interestingly, and relevant to our goal here at Charter Path, a real lack in the skills as well within the diversity of trustees available. So over recent years, marketing and digital skills have been a real the number one skill that's in demand for charities. But actually, finance skills, given these financial challenges, have now overtaken and become the most in-demand skill set. So it's a really challenging environment for charities right now, and that's unsurprising then that we see that 1 in 3 charities are now at risk of closure as a consequence of these collective challenges they're facing. So that was the background to why Alice and I started Charter Path, and our mission was particularly to inspire more finance professionals to volunteer their skills. At the moment, around 10% of finance professionals specifically volunteer their skills in the non-profit sector. We want to get that to 50%, to very much have a model similar to what you see in the legal profession, where volunteering is a real core part of what it means to be an accountant or a finance professional. When we dig into the why, and it was very relevant to the topic today, why ultimately there is a shortage of finance professionals volunteering. The biggest driver is around available time. Not a huge surprise, but that's why we're focusing on that as to how we can overcome some of those barriers. But also the other one is around just awareness, frankly, awareness of the impact they can make, the huge value that their skills could bring to the charities, the types of activities that they'd be undertaking. So we'll be touching on that as a theme as well within this session. Just briefly on what we do at Charter Path, 3 parts of our activity. One is really focused towards finance professionals. That's the focus of today's session. How can we inspire more finance professionals to volunteer their skills? Secondly, it's around how we can connect them with charities and how we can make sure that we can support the significant number of vacancies that currently exist in the non-profit sector. And the last piece around engage is more how we engage the wider profession to remove some of those barriers. So working with employers, for example, to support on skill-based volunteering as part of their employee offering. Last plug for Charter Path. Seen really good growth over the last 4 years. So now over 2,000 finance professionals in our community, over 250 charities that we've directly supported. And really excitingly, over 20,000 hours contributed to the non-profit sector, equating to over £1 million worth of value. So this is your chance to join that. Imagine what we can do if we do get the impact we can make if we can get to 50% of finance professionals volunteering their skills. So my last piece, and this is a nice link into yourself, Laura, as a sort of segue in, is looking at time. Time I find kind of fascinating. So, 8,760 hours in a year. And back to where do we spend our time? And, we've got a few different lenses here. But I mean, the Netflix one is always a bit of a shocker when you think about just the sheer number of hours that people are, spending on, other activities, and whether they could find specifically here 30 hours a year to volunteer as a trustee. That is the typical number of hours that a trustee role involves. So just wanted to provide a bit of context there as to finding time to give back. But let's head over now to speak with Laura and more about her kind of practical experience as a treasurer and trustee. So let me stop sharing and that we can get to a bigger screen view. So this will work better. So Laura, welcome. Very nice to see you. Do you want just to talk a bit more? I mean, you've obviously had this incredible career as a very successful FD and finance professional. You've also had a career, a charity career, where you volunteer in a number of different treasurer and trustee roles. Do you want to just start with just briefly, bring that to life for some of our listeners and viewers, and then from there we'll dig into maybe a bit more about how you can help share the load.
Yeah, absolutely. So, well, first of all, thank you for having me. It's brilliant to
Pleasure.
be here, and I'm very passionate about the work that CharterPath do because I think it's a brilliant opportunity for finance professionals to do more volunteering. I've got so much out of volunteering, so it's great to be able to think about how we can do that for more people. So my background then, I am fairly, well, the first part of my career is fairly traditional. So I started my career in I trained at Deloitte, ACA trained, did the kind of typical graduate program, and then ended up spending 13, nearly 14 years of my career at Asda.
Yeah.
So I did lots of different roles at Asda, had a really varied career. I was the head of internal audit for a while. I ran the shared service function for a while. And my last role at Asda was finance transformation. So I did lots of different things, had a great kind of professional career at Asda particularly. But towards the sort of latter part of my accounting, kind of core accounting career, I ended up working part-time.
Yeah.
And that was important to me because I had small children and wanting to work part-time, I ended up doing a job share,
Yeah.
which, for people who don't know, that's kind of one full-time role split, well, not split, shared with two people. And I was able to job share and work part-time and continue to do those kind of big, challenging professional roles. And initially that was because I wanted to spend more time with my children when they were small. As the children got older, I actually used that working part-time to unlock something else, which is effectively volunteering and finance
Amazing.
trustee work. So I kind of continued to work 3 days a week. And then on the other 2 days a week, I did other things that I enjoyed. So a big part of that is kind of running, cycling, exercise, fitness, all that sort of crazy adventure
I
stuff.
love it.
But I also am trustee and treasurer of two different charities. So I sit on the board of Citizens Advice in Leeds, which is a sort of social justice advice charity, and also a really small, well, not, I was going to say really small, but growing charity in York, which is called Older Citizens Advocacy York. And we effectively do a similar thing, working with older people, advocating for them. So I've found almost a way of kind of working that fit between my professional career, doing this kind of interesting, challenging professional work, and then also volunteering. And actually had a big sort of turnaround in my career later on in my career, in that I decided after spending a significant amount of my time in corporates. Late last year, we actually left the corporate world behind and set up our own business, which is advising sort of organisations on how to implement job share and other types of
Right.
flexible work, which is the job share revolution. And we also do kind of leadership development through our kind of leadership development company, which is called Artemis Thrive. So that's how you get to that sort of slightly cheesy LinkedIn bio. But I think volunteering and being part of a charity board is something that's made that possible
Yeah.
because actually I am a bit of a finance geek, but I'm not only a finance geek. And I
Yes.
love the fact that charity gives me a way to kind of do some of the things I love about being a finance professional, but also do other things in my life. So
Yes.
a bit of an interest in, 5 or 6 years ago, I was fairly kind of standard as an accountant. And I think I've kind of gone on a slightly different path now, which is
It, I find it, I mean, I love that kind of story and that experience, and particularly in terms of one of the themes that's been coming, back to me over recent months has been thinking about finance skills as genuine superpowers. And I think back to my own career, and there are times where, I've been in very kind of hardcore finance roles and sort of CFO type roles. And at times also wanted to escape from that and wanted to, do business roles and go and lead operations teams and other bits and pieces. But it's almost come full circle now to being actually incredibly proud of those financial skills and also the opportunities they've unlocked for me to be able to give back, for example, through, whether that's in charities, whether that's in the school where I'm a governor, where you suddenly realize how much appreciated those skills can be and the difference that they can make.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the skills that make you successful as a finance professional are also the skills that can make you successful as a charity trustee, for example. But they are also skills that can be enhanced by being
Yes.
a charity volunteer or
Yes.
a trustee. And I sit on the board of Leeds Citizens Advice, and my fellow board members are phenomenal. They are like their pedigree is just outstanding. The backgrounds they come from, the experiences they've got. And I sit there amongst them and quite often have feelings of imposter syndrome because they are so capable and experienced. But they all bring something different. And I think
Yes.
hopefully I bring something different. But I learned so much from them. And I know certainly when I was at ASDA and now within my kind of new career, I was able to take those experiences back into the sort of business or my professional role. And I became much better as a finance
Yes.
professional because of those
Taking maybe a
experiences.
different perspective or, take
Absolutely.
a
Yeah.
step back, maybe that the skills that you
Yeah,
develop through the volunteering help you to,
exactly.
rather than it can be the temptation of people who love numbers and spreadsheets, just, I've been there, to keep digging, you get right down in the detail and actually having that ability to also take a step back,
Yeah,
the impact you
exactly.
can make. And interesting, one thing I mean, I love what you've done with the job share revolution because it's that sort of natural step from you practically making that work in your working life to actually then take those ingredients that you've worked through to make it work to then almost create a mold or a template that other organizations could apply. Just a bit on that before we go then specifically into how that could also be relevant for volunteering. How how has that worked for you? How do you make that work as from a job share? What would be some of the aspects or elements, that make that be successful, that I suppose then is the advice that you're applying to other organizations as part of, what
Yeah.
you do now?
Yeah, I mean, I think the main thing to say is that job sharing is effectively a way of making big, high impact roles accessible for
Yeah.
people who work part time.
Yeah.
And I mean, I could talk all day about gender diversity and kind of equity and diversity and how we encourage individuals from all sorts of backgrounds into senior roles. But one of the biggest barriers, particularly to women in senior roles, is a lack of flexibility in senior roles.
Yes.
And
Yes.
that's one of the kind of it's a really difficult problem to solve because if you have a really high impact challenging role that requires a level of presence and physically being there either remotely or kind of in person, that is quite difficult to do part time.
Yes.
But actually, if you do it as a job share, you
Yeah.
have two people covering, so you are able to do those really big roles. I think the biggest challenge we see when we talk to organisations and individuals about job sharing is just awareness.
Yeah.
The most common phrase we hear is, "Oh, that sounds really good, but it wouldn't work in my role." And it's like
Yeah.
we are trying to dispel that myth because it is our very firm belief that all roles can be job shared. Because the way that job sharing works, you create an absolutely seamless relationship between two individuals, and you have kind of handoffs between those two individuals, so that it's almost as if you are one. So
Yes.
to a stakeholder, you are one person effectively. So, regardless, we were at ASDA and we were running, finance transformation program for probably what is the biggest tech implementation in, well, definitely in UK retail history, but, certainly within Europe at the minute, it's probably the biggest tech change program. And we were managing the implementation of that into finance. Massive stakeholder management challenge.
Yes.
But no one, if someone told me something on a Monday, Chloe knew that for a Thursday,
Amazing.
and she, there was a seamless way of work. And so the biggest challenge we see with organizations is understanding how it works and almost opening up minds to the fact that
Yeah.
this is a great way to retain people within who may otherwise leave the workforce. But also it gives you a much better output because you've got two individuals doing one tricky role. So you've got the
Yes.
power of two brains for the price of one effectively,
Yes.
which when you're doing, they quite often say it's lonely at the top.
Oh,
So if
completely.
you're in a senior role, if everything's kind of, the buck stops with you, if that's two people, that's really, really powerful.
Yeah, that
And I
sort
think
of that moment where you are crossing over and and you can have that kind of exchange and it's sort of one's coming out of their portion of time, but then it's supercharging that the individual into the next, isn't it? I think
exactly.
that's
And the other thing
incredible.
is, sometimes when you're doing these kind of big, challenging tricky roles, you just wish, oh, I wish I had some time to think.
Yeah.
Well, when you're doing a job share, you do, because,
Mm.
I would finish on a Wednesday night. I never used to, you don't forget about work. This is a big job that I really wanted to do and I enjoyed it. And it was a running joke. I used to go running on a Thursday morning, and invariably on a Thursday afternoon, I would send Chloe a voice note going, I've solved that problem. Just
Comes
because
to
I'd
you.
been for a run and I'd had
Yes,
that
you've got the
headspace.
time. Yes.
Yeah, you get some thinking time. So I think that's a real, there's multiple benefits, but I think there's lots of benefits that can translate into a volunteering capacity as well.
Yeah, and let's touch on that briefly. So, two parts that you said there that particularly resonated. One was that piece around being lonely at the top, and we definitely hear that in like sort of anecdotally as feedback from people in treasurer roles where they can sometimes feel, specifically on their own in that role or taking a lot of accountability in that role. And then the other one, which like particularly jumped out on me was having that flexibility. So often people can say, like, it's very hard for me to commit to be a treasurer or trustee because, have certain times of the year maybe where I'm particularly busy, depending on, seasonality of their organization or their role. Or or to your point exactly, it could be specific to a, point in time in their life, whether it's family or other matters, that might mean that they have some, restrictions on their amount of time they could do or the time of day they can do. So it
Yeah.
feels like there must be a lot of value if we could get maybe that job sharing model to work even for, say, finance trustees and treasurers.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. And I think that is, that's one of the things I think it would be great if we could crack, because I guess there's two real or two big impacts I think we could have. I think the first one is if you don't have the time to commit fully to all of the time requirements.
Yeah,
I think one thing I would say when we think about volunteering roles, and particularly finance treasurer trustee roles, the time requirements will be different for every single role.
yeah,
So there is no standard one size fits
this is the
all.
answer.
You have to
Yeah,
be clear on what you think the timelines are going to be. But say it is a relatively high input finance role, splitting that in half makes it more accessible. So if
yes,
you can find a way that you kind of alternate on and off, and particularly if it's a bit more of a hands-on role. So
yeah,
for example, if it's a sort of trustee role where you go to a board meeting once a quarter and you have some papers to read, potentially there's not a huge amount of splitting that across two people,
yes,
but if it's more of a hands-on role. So for example, at OK, the smaller charity I'm involved in, it's very hands-on. I do the management accounts. I'm in the middle of doing the stat accounts, which is
uh-huh.
absolute blast from the past.
Yeah,
But that absolutely, to share that with someone would be a great way of making that more achievable for someone who's short
yes.
on time.
And back to your point about bouncing things off, sometimes when you lose time, where you're losing the efficiency of time
Yeah,
because you're trying to work out an answer on your own, and you're like, I can't
yeah,
get it to balance, or what am I
yeah.
missing here? And someone else coming in, it could be literally 5 minutes. So they spot
Yeah.
it immediately because they're not necessarily down in the detail.
Yeah, exactly. The other place, though, where I think there is real power in sharing treasurer trustee roles is in this almost like master apprentice type
Yeah,
model.
I love
And
that.
I saw, interestingly, I saw a thing on women on boards yesterday about NED apprenticeships.
Yes,
And I think there's absolutely a place for that for trustee apprenticeships as well.
I
And
love
this
that.
is where you take someone who is experienced, you know, kind of has done the trustee role or the treasurer role for quite a long time, and you bring in an apprentice and kind of train them up. And I think that works on so many levels. It works from the perspective of making the trustee role much more accessible,
Yeah,
because quite frankly, when you start as a trustee, it might feel quite intimidating. It might feel
yes.
like everyone else knows what they're talking
Yeah,
about and
maybe you
you
haven't got the
don't.
air cover on you because people are looking to you very quickly, maybe. And
Exactly.
you newer to the charity, potentially don't know the background or the history.
Exactly. I mean, my experience is that trustee boards are generally very friendly and
Yeah,
they people will help you, but I think it's inevitable that you might feel it would be nicer if there was a kind of a glide path in.
yeah,
The other place I think it's so helpful though is when you are a trustee, and particularly when you're a treasurer, it can feel like the sort of role that you're never going to get out of
yeah,
because finding the successor is
yeah,
difficult. I mean, the person I replaced at OK, I think he was trying to move on for lifestyle reasons. He was trying to move on for several years, but
yeah,
finding that backfill is difficult. So I think if you can create an effective master apprentice model, I think that really helps at both ends. And obviously that's going to really help with the diversity of boards because
yes.
boards are made up significantly of older white men
Yeah, I
and
mean,
we need to
two
change
thirds
that.
are white males over the age of 55 is the reality,
Yeah.
less than 1% under 30 years old,
Yeah.
as an example. And this is a great way to sort of bring, back to the really worrying thing when you look at the trends of volunteering stats is that we've seen, so 27% volunteering regularly down to 16%. But actually, if you look at the younger, demographic, they're down at like 10, 11%
Yeah.
now. And I mean, that's a worrying sign as potentially where that trend's just going to keep going
Yeah,
if we don't see
absolutely.
some change and sort of bring them through. It's really like one part like linked to that, which back to sort of I suppose sort of more broadly sort of time management. So I mean I'm completely on side with you, and I love that apprenticeship piece. I love that succession piece. When we think back to sort of more broadly to time management, I suppose to your point, one of the challenges here is that there isn't a defined role job spec of a treasurer or a trustee or an honorary treasurer. And so, and linked to that, then the demands are going to be different from kind of every like organization. What would be your sort of advice around that, I suppose, in terms of thinking about sort of strategies of work for you? So, say when you took on your sort of second role, were there things you did differently to the first time round in terms of understanding time commitment and
Yeah.
making
I
that
mean,
work?
I think the first thing I would say is like I'm constantly adapting.
Yeah,
And I think not dissimilar to being kind of part of a big organization, you learn every year how to do things a little bit differently. So,
yeah,
you understand what are going to be the peaks and troughs and all the rest of it. The first thing I would say though is in charities, kind of all roads tend to lead to finance.
yes,
So everyone seems to think finance need to be involved in everything. And that, well, I was going to say, in a good charity, everyone thinks finance need to be involved in everything.
yeah,
So if the opposite is true, you need to be a bit wary because if people are
yes,
not including finance, that is a concern. But don't feel like you need to be involved in everything. So I think it's
sure.
really important.
Awareness is important. Awareness of what's going on, but whether
Yes,
you then practically need to be involved in everything is different.
exactly. So I think often that comes down to like the basics of good governance.
Yeah.
So I think when you go into a charity at first, get a grip of the risk register, understanding the risks around the charity and the finance framework. So have they got good finance processes and controls in place? Now, small charities might not have any of those things. And the thing I've learned is if there isn't kind of a good finance framework and a decent risk register, get one in place because that
Yes.
can be the foundation of everything else. And saying risk register to particularly smaller charities who might not have that kind of governance background, it can all feel a little bit scary. So we're not talking about, not talking about a kind of FCA registered level of risk.
Yes.
sector, but having a basic understanding of what the risks are in the charity itself is important. And then that allows you to focus your time. I think the other thing that I think is really important, though, for managing your time as a trustee is make sure that all trustees recognise that finance is their
Yeah.
job as well. Because I think that often and this isn't a reflection from the charity that I'm involved in because I think they are generally quite good at that. But often people think finance is the job of the treasurer, and
Yes.
it is important that all trustees recognise. I mean, they have a statutory duty to be accountable for the financial governance of the charity. So making sure that people don't think the finance person's just going to sort it all out and anything relating to finance is going to sit with the finance person. I think that's quite important
And
as well.
how do you any advice on how to do that for someone in a role? So we're talking in a minute a bit more about some tips for sort of people new in role, but if you're sort of encountering that right now, what would you advise them to do to try and help drive greater sort of either understanding or accountability?
My first bit would be demystify it.
Yeah.
So most people, it's not that people don't want to care, it's that, finance people sometimes have a tendency to make stuff a bit complicated
Yeah.
and maybe to hold it to
Mm.
themselves, but also to
Yeah.
overcomplicate. And
Yeah.
you need to find ways of articulating your finance position in a way that people can understand. And again, that will change. You will have boards that are vastly different in their kind of experience and level of financial literacy, but help understanding your board and helping them to understand what the finances mean in an easy to understand way. And also don't expect that to come on day one. So it might
Yes.
take you, my big tip with charities is things take longer than you expect. So it might take you a year to get to even just getting into a cadence and a rhythm of people asking questions when you do your finance update,
Yeah.
but keep going at it. And I
Yes.
think trying to explain things, even just being transparent, there are some charities who don't even share financial updates on a regular basis. Then you get to
Yes.
the end of the year and you go, we've got no money.
Yeah.
That's not really on. So I think as a treasurer, trustee, honorary treasurer, anything like that, you have to open up the financial position and share it with the board and make sure everyone's clear. So trying to demystify it and help people understand it, I think that's the best way to get buy-in.
Love it. And one a link to that one, sort of the other end of the spectrum, you talked about being in a situation where it's the treasurer role is maybe for you like more strategic because they do maybe have like employed resource. Where in that interplay of your finance trustee with an employed team, advice on sort of who does what between you, because that can often be a bit of confusion as to, what's my role, what's your role, who does.
And I think it is important, no matter the size of the charity, to work out what the kind of respective roles are.
Yeah,
But I do think it's important, particularly. So I'm trustee of Lead Citizens Advice as well. We have a phenomenal CEO. We've got a brilliant finance manager.
yeah,
I really don't get involved in the day to day. My role there is very, very different, and it's about strategic direction. I get involved with the audit, so I
yeah,
kind of meet with the audit partner and all that sort of stuff. So the role I try to play there, and whether I get it right or not, I'm not quite sure, but I have a good working relationship with both the finance manager and the CEO. And often that is about being a listening ear and talking to them about things that are on their mind, asking questions and seeing it as a kind of a discussion in a relationship, but equally being prepared to challenge and
mm,
being a different pair of eyes because you do come at it from a different perspective when you're not in the thick of it. And that's the role of a
yes,
trustee, is to stand back from it. So, my personal style is I want to have effective working relationships with people through kind of collaboration. So I kind of work on those relationships and then offer both support and challenge. And kind of I think in the bigger charities, the roles are quite well defined.
yeah.
So, there's a delegated authority for various committees
You have
and
calendars
the
of
board. And
meetings with very
yeah,
specific points in
exactly.
time, whether it's the audit or whether it's
Yeah.
is or whether it's other
So
areas.
in some ways, it's harder to work out the boundaries in a smaller charity where
Yeah,
the things aren't well defined. And the way I approach that is just talk to people. So we've
yeah,
just got a new charity director actually at OK. And we are in the middle of having conversations about what are you going to
mm,
do, what am I going to do, in
yeah,
a really professional, courteous, collaborative way. But it's important to say, well,
yeah.
I don't want to step on your toes, but equally I want you to know that I support you. So I think just talking to people is the most
And that
important.
avoids the surprises, doesn't it? Because I think that's what can be hard in volunteering roles can be, you've got into it with an expectation of a certain amount of time commitment or, within that, and then suddenly there's some big surprise because you are, whether it's the, statutory accounts or other items or the audit, you haven't necessarily understood what your role might be in that and the sort of time commitment. Yeah, I really like that. It's funny how often people don't just have those just very straightforward conversations, and whether that's sort of confidence to do it or whether it because maybe they don't know the full remit
Yeah.
or yeah, I mean, it's yeah, feels like that's the way forward though, doesn't it? In terms of just have the conversation and agree where the boundaries are, and also I suppose be dynamic with that too. It goes back
Yeah.
to the point about the job sharing, doesn't it? Ultimately, in terms of if it's not working and the time commitment can't work as it currently stands, how do you again sort of proactively raise that rather than find yourself in a
Yeah.
situation like I have done in the past where suddenly you're trying to find 24, 30 hours and 24 hours because
Yeah.
you haven't
I do
necessarily flagged it
think
earlier.
I do think it's important when you kind of first start thinking about applying for a role is you have an honest conversation with whether it's the chair of the trustees or,
Mm,
if appropriate, the chief exec or whoever about what they think the time commitment is.
yeah.
Because sometimes I think it can evolve, but I think you do need, there are very different, there's a spectrum of
Mm,
how intense the time commitment is. And I think particularly for treasurers or kind of honorary treasurers, finance trustees, I think being clear on what the general time commitment is, and then also asking the question about and where are the peaks and troughs?
yeah.
Because it's a really small thing, but like we typically at Citizens Advice sign the accounts at the July board meeting. I
Mm,
always go on holiday at the July board meeting.
yeah.
I
It's like
didn't work that out
the
until
big
kind of,
one.
yeah, yeah. So it's just
Mm,
having that conversation, but then also having a conversation about what the areas of flex are. So,
yeah.
for example, at OK, our board meeting has always forever been 6 till 8 p.m. For me, with two small kids, it's not
Not good.
great. So I asked to see if we could move it from 5 till 7, made a massive difference on my ability to get home and put my kids to bed, and
Mm,
had pretty much zero impact on anyone else. So we just
mm,
moved it. So there's a bit of like I think it all goes back to having honest and transparent conversations and asking questions about what's possible.
and it's interesting because I would guess, but feel free to correct me. Some of that comes about with yourself because of the experience you've had in your professional life, the variety of activities you're doing, and the sort of, I suppose, the confidence and the experience that that's instilled in you to have those conversations. So, like the last bit to cover off before we wrap up was around particularly, say, newer people coming into maybe their first trustee or treasurer role, or maybe they've just started in a role sort of tips and advice to maybe accelerate some of the learnings you had in your sort of career and volunteering career, professional and volunteering career, that you would maybe recommend to them to apply around making it work and making maybe having those right conversations at the start?
Yeah, I think the first thing I would say is ask for help.
Yeah,
So most people who are involved in the charity sector are really, really good people. People
yeah,
get involved with charities because they want to be helpful. So I think I have never had a scenario in my kind of board trustee career where I have asked someone for help and haven't given it.
yeah,
In fact, the exact opposite. Everyone wants to, oh yeah, so even if it's just saying, oh, I watched you at that board meeting and I really liked how you presented those points. Could we have a coffee and have a chat? Like
yeah,
people love that. So, I have regular chats, coffees, whatever, with my fellow trustees because it just helps. So be
yes,
prepared to ask for help
yeah,
and be prepared to say, I don't fully know about this,
yeah.
and be you don't have to put on a front that you know everything. So that would be my first
I
tip
like
would
that.
be just be kind of be ready to ask for help. I think there's the bit I said earlier on about, being clear on the time expectations, ask
Sure.
questions about the time expectations. But then I think my biggest tip around kind of time management is about like manage your energy, not your time.
Okay, explain that.
So find something you are passionate about and you will find the time. So
Yeah,
your bit of you spend however long cleaning or you spend however long on Netflix.
yeah,
I don't spend that much time cleaning because I really don't care. But I don't spend a lot of time on Netflix either,
Yeah,
because that is, and sometimes I do, but not when I've got kind of what I would class as better things to do. And
sure.
I think if you find something that you are passionate about and energized about, you will find the time.
Love it.
But you do need to find something you're passionate about. So, like, I thought at first, oh, I just want to help with a charity. And that's not enough. You have to
Mm,
find a charity. So I'm involved in social justice charities. That gets me out of bed. That's what, and hear the stories of the people we help. And that means sometimes I have to do some stuff at 11 o'clock at night or whatever. Will I want to? Because I see why. So find a cause that you're really passionate about. And I think you'll find that you can kind of find a way to find the time.
I love that. Well, quite like linked to this, people have very different views on this. I'm just interested. Do you keep a record of your time that you spend out of interest?
No,
Yeah, it's just
never
interesting.
even occurred to me.
It's just something that I've been experimenting with. Someone suggested it to me because it was as much own sort of self-reflection back and planning forward. And sort of, it brings shivers from, I trained originally at PwC, so similar background to yourself. And, timesheets was my life, and that sort of horror of filling in your timesheets.
Yeah.
But interesting, I've been sort of trialing it a bit, just as much for awareness, I suppose, as to where my time's going. And I'm not a slave to it, but it's been quite helpful actually, just to get a picture, I suppose.
I do think as well, though, I don't track my time, but as part of doing my new ACA training record
Oh yes.
thing, I did try to kind of work out how much development I'd done through the charity. So for the first time last year, I did the charity accounts, and actually that entire experience was a learning experience and kind of valid CPD. So I did track that, and I was surprised by how much time I
Mm,
spent on it.
mm,
So I do think there's benefit in it. The other thing I would say as well, though, is a lot of organisations offer time for volunteering.
yeah.
So you might get 2 or 3 volunteering days. And certainly at Asda, I used that to
Mm,
kind of, because it does add up the time that you spend. And so it is worth talking to your employer about how you might be able to use those volunteering ways potentially in a flexible way. And so I
mm.
think there's some benefit in tracking it. Um, but yeah, it does slightly send shivers down my spine from the Deloitte days.
Yeah, it's funny. Like one of just the interesting kind of learnings from it for me was that one of the things that I was involved in where I thought I was spending a lot of time on it, actually once I tracked it, I realized that I wasn't. It sometimes can just become sort of, I suppose, maybe it was occupying more of my thinking sort of
Hmm.
capacity maybe than it was actually my
Hmm.
time. So it was just I suppose when I was worrying about things or like trying to prioritize, it was often something that came to my mind. When I actually tracked the hours, it wasn't actually that big a time commitment. So it's just quite an interesting,
That is interesting.
yeah, sort of, particularly in that sort of more portfolio world where we are spinning many plates and
Yeah.
trying to work
Yeah.
out where does the time go. But yeah, I love that point you were saying there about your energy versus your time, because you can get you can get into habits as to how you spend your time, for example, that isn't necessarily making you feel good about yourself. So I do think there's a lot to be said for that around, in my case, similar to you, love the exercise, love the running, love the volunteering. If I can make it all
It's
work.
just unfortunate we kind of you then realize you need to actually do some work to pay the bills as well, don't you? Which is
Back to the timesheet. That was part of it. I think that was, if I'm honest with myself, it was part of that tracking it actually for paid work, but then taking some of those parallels back to say actually how am I almost like mini audit. It's quite interesting once it's used for a short period of time just to see where your time
yeah,
goes.
no, I do think there's some benefit in that.
Laura, I'm conscious of time, so I think I'll wrap up our fireside. Thank you so much for sharing your advice. I think like, an absolute inspiration for both what you're doing in your professional life and sort of the variety of activities that you kind of curated that marry up to all your different passions. Like hugely inspiring. And I know from all the conversations we've had, like the impact you're making on the charities that you support is amazing. So yeah, big thank you on behalf of all the team at Charterpath for your support of our organisation, but also for what you're doing to represent finance professionals in the wider non-profit sector. So thank you.
Oh, you're very welcome, because I think that it is such a brilliant opportunity for individuals to get so much out of volunteering, not to speak of the impact on charities. So yeah, you're doing brilliant work at Chartpath, Alex. So
Oh,
just keep it up.
thank you. I might record that, for those moments where maybe my energy is dipping halfway down.
So
Right.
send you a voice note and you just
Yeah,
play it
can
on
you?
repeat.
Right, I will quickly just share up the slides, just the final few slides. So, for those who feel as I do, hugely inspired by what you've just heard from Laura, and sort of lots of really good advice there on how you can make this work for you. Please just do join the Charter Path community. We have loads of resources to help, keep inspiring you to find the right volunteer role. Really important, as Laura said, find that cause that you're passionate about. But also, yeah, amazing array of different role opportunities out there to volunteer. And also, advice on how, for example, to approach your employer in the situation which you were just talking about, maybe to utilize, volunteering benefits that they have within your overall package as your employer. So please join the community. You can find us on LinkedIn, Charterpath on LinkedIn, but equally you can go to www.charterpath.org.uk where you can sign up to join us, and that will give you access to latest news, events that we're running similar to this, and all the job opportunities that we have up on the site. Let me just click through. I utilised most of the questions I had a number of questions pre-submitted, so I think I ran through all of those, Laura. So thank you so much for joining us today, and thank you for everyone for listening in. And one thing just to plug, our next Charter Path Masterclass, and actually links very neatly with some of the topics we've discussed today, is how to make that journey from volunteering and how that can actually contribute towards those roles in the boardroom. And I think, as Laura touched on, a lot of those skills that she's applying within her systems advice role really fits with that as a real kind of strategic NED type role. So yes, book that one in, 27th of November. We're looking about how volunteering can be supportive of your kind of future boardroom career. Or as usual, all of the webinars and podcasts that we hold are recorded and will be up on the YouTube channel, Charterpath. Search on YouTube. Thank you everyone for listening. Thank you, Paul, for joining. Good to see you.
Thank you.
Yeah, look out for our future webinars. Thank you, everyone.
Okay. Thanks, guys.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
This is the awkward bit where I always struggle to find the stop recording. I can always edit this out. It's fine. It's always hard, like too many screens. There we go. Bye, everyone. There we go. Stop
That works.
recording.